Stiyl Magnus was once a beloved side character in a certain magical index, but after multiple controversies in the light novel, readers absolutely hate his guts. So what the hell did Stiyl do which made him so unlikable? And why do I think this 7-foot-tall, angsty, chain-smoking 14-year-old is worth defending? Stiyl made his debut in Index's first volume as a member of Necessarius, the Church of Necessary Evil, basically working for the Anglicans to hunt enemy magicians or doing other secret missions. Him and Kanzaki were tasked with erasing Index's memory within the walls of Academy City, despite Stiyl being Index's previous guardian, as he was gaslit by Archbishop Laura Stewart into believing it was for the greater good. Erasing Index's memory would supposedly stop her brain from overloading due to her perfect memory and the thousands of toxic magical books in her head, known as grimoires. But Stiyl was deceived, as this was all a lie to neutralize the threat that Index posed. As the church were afraid she would use her vast knowledge to eventually rebel and potentially become an all-powerful magic god. Therefore, removing her memories would allow the church to easily control her. Stiyl, however, was under the impression he had to do this in order to save Index's life. Therefore, he went ahead with the task of erasing the memories of his dear loved one, even if it broke his heart, and Index would no longer know who the hell he is. As Stiyl and Kazaki were sent to Academy City to conduct the next memory erasure, they encountered Kamijo Toma, someone who had no idea about the true reason why Stiyl was after Index, as Toma presumed they were after the powerful books in her head, although he knew nothing about the Anglican Church or even magic as a whole. After Styl's defeat by Toma, Toma then discovered the truth, or at least what appeared to be the truth, after being explained the situation by Kanzaki. But after going back and forth between coping and denial, he didn't accept the information presented before him, learning that scientifically, brains cannot overload. And then he managed to save Index from her robotic John's Pen mode at the cost of losing his own memories. Pure poetry. Stiyl learned that he had been lied to this entire time, and yet he still stayed loyal to the church, acting as their representative during the Deep Blood arc and being assigned to work with Toma to stop the rogue magician Aureolus Izzard. Stiyl would continue to team up with Toma multiple times in Old Testament, notably during the Book of the Law arc and the Diocesi arc. This was despite the animosity and rivalry between them. They managed to put aside their personal differences to work together and stop the threats of the Roman Catholic Church. Then during World War III, Stiyl finally showed some balls to go against the church, as he was opposed to Laura using Index's remote control on her, even if it was in order to disrupt the controller that Fiamma of the Right stole from England. Nevertheless, Stiyl managed to contain John's Pen mode Index, and with Fiamma's defeat, everything seemed to be resolved. In New Testament, Stiyl did help out during the Ophanus arc in the battle against the terrorist magic cabal known as Gremlin, but he didn't really show up much in the rest of the sequel. Although when Toma did invade England alongside Aleister Crowley, Stiyl personally tortured Toma in the Tower of London, since he believed Toma was now an enemy of Britain and wanted to extract information out of him. The worst of Stiyl, however, was yet to come. In Genesis Testament Volume 4, Stiyl and Kanzaki headed to Los Angeles with Toma in order to stop R&C occultics. They had to defeat a magician called Citrinitas, who was taking the form of Melzabeth Grocery, a businesswoman who is the CEO of Space Engage, whose technology was helping R&C cause the disappearances of civilians in the city. Stiyl believed that Melzabeth was willing to collaborate with R&C, while Toma took the opposite viewpoint, believing she had been forced to. Stiyl wanted Toma to hand over Melzabeth's daughter to him, but as Toma refused, Stiyl shot Toma with a 5-over Meltdowner unit, not only acting as a counter to Toma's Magic Breaker, but Stiyl knew by using the weapon that killing Toma would not be traced back to him, and Index would never know that Stiyl was the true culprit. Toma still survived, of course. Then later in Genesis Testament Volume 12, Stiyl attempted to murder Toma again, this time after Toma had come back from the dead, and Stiyl claimed that Toma no longer had the right to be alive, as Index should return to the custody of the Anglican Church due to the death of her new guardian Toma, and Toma has no right to claim her back due to an impossible situation of miraculously defying logic and coming back to life. Stiyl even brought 2 magic gods alongside him and did learn his lessons from how he got defeated back in Old Testament. He even channeled the power of both Nephthys and Yang Yang to get a crazy power up, but Stiyl was defeated yet again, even if Toma did have some help from Accelerator and Alice. As Stiyl went from being such a strong ally of Toma to a guy that tortured him and then tried to murder him twice, he has received a lot of hate from readers of the light novel. In fact, some believe his character has regressed to what it was during the early points of Old Testament rather than developing forward. They say that Stiyl is just an asshole in the light novels, and to be honest, I agree with them. What Stiyl did in Genesis Testament 4 and 12 was unarguably evil, but I do think there is legitimate reasons why Stiyl does act the way he does due to his own feelings and the actual point of his character. That's not to say I justify him trying to kill Toma because he's still an index simp, but I do think it makes actual sense why he does act this way. And contrary to what people may think, I still believe Stiyl is a well-written character despite his lack of screen time later in the novels. Ever since the first arc, Stiyl truly loves Index, and ultimately how he acts is his way of coming to terms with and processing the loss of Index. He was faced with an impossible situation where he had to erase the memories of the person who meant the most to him, as he was told it would save her. In many ways, this is a fate worse than Index dying for Stiyl, as Index now becomes a completely different person and continues life not knowing the bond they once shared. It's a truly tragic story for both Stiyl and Kanzaki, and if you have lost anyone important to you, then you should be able to sympathize with Stiyl. I think Stiyl loved Index so much that he was willing to let her go for her own well-being, which is one of the hardest decisions that anyone could make. One of the reasons why I like Stiyl so much is part of me does actually relate to him, especially as I've gotten older. While Stiyl is only 14, Kamachi presents him as a realist who only accepts the logic presented before his eyes, and this even continues into Genesis Testament. Stiyl would still think Melzebeth was a villain. He only believed the things he had seen for himself. Even if there was hope to suggest that Melzebeth was a victim forced to collaborate, Styl's realism made him convinced that she was a bad person due to his cynical outlook on the world, and the information he perceives he accepts as fact. Styl's realism can be seen as an adult outlook on the world, which is ironic considering, yes, he's only 14. But this was Kamachi's intention with how Kanzaki and Stiyl appeared older in Old Testament, even though they were actually pretty young. They appeared to be the ones in a position of authority, who knew about a world that Toma didn't, and had all the information at their disposal already. And yet, ironically, they were the ones who were deceived the entire time, misguided by what they perceived before their eyes. It is Toma's childlike idealism and willingness not to accept the information presented before his eyes which is the thing that actually resolves the problem with Index. Styl's realism is a cornerstone of his character, as unlike Toma, who is the ultimate idealist who will reject logic and cling to hope and belief in 99% of situations, Stiyl is the opposite. He eventually accepts the misinformation about Index presented to him by Laura as a fact, even if he is unwilling to believe it at first. He is forced to accept reality, move on with his life, and no longer questions the authority of the church. This aspect of blind faith ties in with Styl's loyalty to the Anglican Church, even after he discovered that he was deceived. In Old Testament 1, it is science that highlights the reality of Index's memory crisis, that brains cannot actually overload from a perfect memory. It is the knowledge outside the church that exposes its lies. Stiyl had been so gaslit by Laura and the church that he no longer thought for himself. And this is representative about how real-life cults and organizations can manipulate information and brainwash people in order to control them. Or even more broader than that, as the knowledge we had as a human race 100 years ago is far different to what it is now. And you you can go back through generation by generation throughout history, and what is accepted as the truth and fact changes all the time. Styl's opposition to Laura in World War III hits so hard because he's finally willing to do something. His love to keep Index safe breaks the chains temporarily that Laura had over him in that moment. Back to Toma, as when Stiyl first met and fought Toma, undoubtedly Stiyl saw himself in him, as Stiyl was once in Toma's shoes, and the fact that Toma could now be part of Index's life and develop some form of relationship made Stiyl bitter and angry. Back when Stiyl was Index's guardian, he went into the Anglican libraries, desperate to find an alternate solution to Index's memory, but he found nothing. Just like how Toma was also desperate for another way, Stiyl also acts like a villain in front of Toma before an injured Index, as this is his way of coming to terms with and processing the loss of Index. By being someone he is not, it allows Stiyl to mentally be able to actually perform the act of erasing Index's memories without being overcome with emotions of regret and grief. You could say Stiyl chose the easy way out, and he gave up on the girl he loved the most. But in his situation, and with the information he had access to at the time, can you truly blame him? Toma's role in the story is to break illusions, and he undoubtedly destroyed the illusion that surrounded Index and revealed the truth, showing Stiyl that hope and idealism can sometimes bring about a miracle. Then Toma succeeded Stiyl as Index's guardian, basically replacing the role in Index's life that Stiyl once held. Stiyl does this for Index's own benefit, as she just thinks of him as a bad guy who tried to kidnap her. And now Toma is now the only person who treats Index like a human being and not as an object in the form of a grimoire library, just as Stiyl and Kanzaki once humanized Index. What makes it even more difficult for Stiyl is now Toma doesn't have to deal with the annual memory loss anymore, but at the same time, Toma did indeed save Index and traded his memories in return, which means Stiyl has conflicting emotions towards Toma, as Toma doesn't even remember anymore what Index meant to him in the short time they did spend together. Post-memory loss Toma believes he has to be the best person possible for Index without knowing the true value of their relationship, and Stiyl has to accept this for Index's sake, even if he can only dream of being in Toma's shoes. Stiyl works alongside Toma after Old Testament Volume 1, not because he suddenly likes him and they're best buddies, but literally because it's his job to do so, as it's for the greater good of the entire world to keep peace between the magic and science sides. Due to the mixed feelings Stiyl has, which I think is understandable, they act more like rivals but have to work together since they have a common enemy or goal. In the Road to Endymion prequel to the Index movie, Toma and Stiyl do have a brief fight, and in Old Testament 2, Stiyl straight up ditches Toma when he's in trouble. This shows that tensions between them still exist, and it's not like Stiyl was never an asshole when they were working together. It's just that he wasn't really showing it as much because, well, it's his mission for Necessarius, and Stiyl in this moment values world peace way more than his personal grudge towards Toma. I mean, he could have straight up said, nah, I don't want to work with Toma, this guy stole my girl. But he prioritized his job over his own personal feelings. I mean, how would you feel if the love of your life forgot about you due to your own actions, and then another dude starts living the life you always wanted with that person, and then finding out that her memory erasure wasn't even necessary at all? To be honest, it's a miracle Stiyl didn't have a mental breakdown, and then getting told by your bosses that you have to work with him multiple times. And remember guys, Stiyl is 14. He's still easily manipulated, and he's angsty as hell. Styl's asshole persona is really important, as I feel without it, he would have lost his shit, as it is his way of coping with a lot of emotional trauma. You could say Stiyl should just move on, which he does somewhat, as he does allow Toma to become Index's guardian, as he realizes that's for her own good, and he no longer bothers the two of them unless it's his mission to do so if Necessarius. But that doesn't mean his emotions just vanished, simply because he removed himself from the situation. It is somewhat similar to how Shokuho Misaki removed herself from Toma's life as she felt replaced, but all it takes is some major event to reignite the fire. Forgive the pun. Toma's invasion of London was was perhaps that turning point for Stiyl, as it generated more animosity from him. While they had fought together multiple times in the past, no doubt this felt like a betrayal for Stiyl. Although it was revealed Terma had good intentions to invade England with Alistair, when it was revealed that Laura was actually the great demon Coronzon the entire time. Still, Styl's asshole persona gave him an excuse to hate on Terma again, and perhaps doubt if Terma had the capacity anymore to keep Index safe. You could argue the Genesis Testament 4 incident comes out of nowhere, but Stiyl already had suspicions about Terma siding with an enemy once before, and twice if we include Terma trying to save Ophanus, which was broadcast to the entire world. But honestly, it is the personal vendetta against Terma that compels Stiyl to do this. I think it is perhaps due to the fact that Coronzon was exposed and defeated that Stiyl is able to act like this now. Stiyl has no links to the new Archbishop, Dion Fortune, who is only in that position for the time being. In fact, other Anglicans in Genesis Testament 13 do not approve of her leadership either. Therefore, after the alleged demise of Coronzon, Stiyl is no longer bound by the chains over him and can seemingly act how he wants without any care of repercussions from his organization. So I don't think it's a coincidence that in Genesis Testament that Stiyl is a lot more violent and aggressive towards Terma, as I think Stiyl might have done something like this in Old Testament if Laura was not around or he wasn't receiving orders from Alistair as well. You could argue that Stiyl needed to appear more regularly in the novels for this development to flow more naturally, especially as we get onto Genesis Testament Volume 12. And to be honest, I think this is a valid point, although I do trust Kamachi's faith he has in his readers to read between the lines and come to our own conclusions based on how the events of the story unfolds, as well as the feelings of the characters. So in GT12, Stiyl simply can't accept Terma's resurrection, as Stiyl feels he is entitled to take back Index, as the initial agreement for Terma to be the guardian of her is over due to his death. Terma simply can't defy all laws and act like nothing ever happened during the time he was dead. I think Kamachi is trying to make some kind of commentary about how different people process death and their reactions to it, and Stiyl is a person who is completely insensitive towards the entire situation and wants the world to move on, as that is the natural way of things after someone in your life dies. Everyone eventually has to move on, but Terma coming back to life puts everything in jeopardy. Therefore, I do think Styl's emotions are somewhat valid in this moment. But he takes things way too far and is being a selfish motherfucker. Trying to murder Terma yet again is purely malicious, and I think this is worse than a GT4 incident. Stiyl is thinking solely about himself in this moment. Even though he is saying that Index will be best off going back to England, let's face it, he just wants her back in his home country. He's trying to justify it, but if he truly cared about Index's feelings in this situation, then Index should have been told that Terma is now back, and therefore she should make her own decision about where she wishes to reside. But now that Stiyl has had this golden opportunity presented before him, where the person who replaced him is now dead, he now thinks it's his time to swoop in, and obviously Terma coming back to life completely ruins that. While yes, with the death of Index's guardian, it is perhaps the correct process for Index to go back to England, the way Stiyl is approaching it is just goddamn awful. But again, Stiyl is a realist. He cannot accept this impossible reality which is unfolding before his eyes. He's just doing what he thinks is the logical move, but of course he is motivated by what he wants himself. The fact that he's willing to go this far shows he has indeed developed since Old Testament, but at the same time, the core of his character is the same, even if this is the most evil version of Stiyl that we've seen so far. At the end of Old Testament 1, he was willing to let Terma have Index and protect her, and was thinking about Index's best interest. Stiyl now being consumed by bitterness, envy, and his own self, seizing the opportunity before his eyes, leads to his downfall. Stiyl still loving Index this far into the story isn't a problem, as love doesn't automatically go away in the span of 7 to 8 months. But Stiyl used his own love for Index as an excuse to do terrible things, and true love is selfless, but Stiyl is being a selfish asshole. I understand how this may feel like a regression of his character to some, but I think a fall from grace doesn't necessarily make it a backtracking moment, as even in Old Testament 1, Stiyl was never this evil. Sure, he was playing the asshole character, but he wasn't actually an asshole inside. He was an angsty 14-year-old gaslit by a great demon who acted nasty as his way to cope with all the trauma he was experiencing. I understand the way he felt in Genesis Testament, but trying to kill Toma was not putting Index before himself and her best interests at heart. It shows you that love can turn you into some kind of monster if you're unable to let a person go and think about their own happiness before your own. Stiyl shows what bitterness and envy can actually do to a good person, as Stiyl feels like a deeply human character. He has a lot of good qualities, but a lot of terrible qualities at the same time. He is a flawed person, and that is what makes him really compelling. Styl's character presents the negative aspects of attachment while also providing valuable lessons on what to do and what not to do when you're trying to grieve and process loss. And ultimately, being able to let someone go for their own sake, that is the most unselfish thing that you can possibly do. But no one is perfect. We all have selfish moments because we are human beings, which is something Toma also understands better than anyone. I'm not sure if I managed to change your mind about Stiyl, but let me know down in the comments. Do you like Stiyl as a character, or do you still hate him? Check out my other videos for more Toaru content, and see you all next time.